Recently, I've been putting some time into Cards. Developed by 1939 Games, a team of former EVE Online developers, Cards is a free-to-play card battle game with a World War II theme that is currently in early access on Steam. At first glance, the pairing of a World War II setting and a card battle game may seem a little odd, but they actually work surprisingly well together in practice. I initially found out about this game through an ad I had seen browsing Facebook one night. Normally those ads are just a bunch of garbage, but for once it seemed that I actually found something worthwhile. And to be honest, I initially set out to write a review of this game, only to discover that it was in fact in early access. So the following is more of my impressions on what I've played so far, as well as some things that I'd like to see added or changed in the game in the months and years to come. As I mentioned above, Cards is a card battle game. It derives its gameplay from other modern card battle games, namely Hearthstone, Elder Scrolls Legends, and other games of that sort. Gameplay consists of drawing cards, spending resources to play different creature cards on the battlefield, in this instance they're military units, and trying to whittle down an opponent's health to zero. A lot of the complexity in card games such as this stem from the various different effects and actions that cards have, different metagame styles that different card decks offer, as well as a good deal of strategic thinking turn to turn in order to come out on top. The main thing that sets this game apart, however, is its World War II theme. From a visual standpoint, all the cards have this amazing looking hand-painted mid-20th century propaganda poster style. Some cards even use famous propaganda posters from around the world as their card art. And another cool aspect is in the deck builder. Many of the cards have small little information sections that provide some of the history and inspiration for any specific card. I like reading through a lot of these little history blurbs, and it was a nice touch that the developers added to give some more context to the game, as well as teaching people about different aspects of World War II history. It's pretty cool. But the World War II setting is more than just a reskin. Surprisingly, 1939 Games has translated a lot of the core gameplay mechanics popular in primarily fantasy-based card games to the World War II period in a fun and believable way. Let's start with the card decks themselves. In other fantasy-based card games, you may have decks around certain character types, like a necromancer or paladin. Those decks then are primarily comprised of cards that reflect aspects of that character. So like a necromancer has a lot of minions that they summon, or something like that. Here in Cards, the card decks are based off some of the major countries involved in the Second World War. Each of these decks are made up of cards that reflect broad battle strategies employed by these nations throughout the war. For example, the British deck has a great number of airplanes, suggesting the significance of the RAF, whereas the German deck is very tank and infantry focused. One somewhat unique system in the game comes in the form of allies. When building a deck, you first select a nation to act as a base to build from. With the ally system, you can then choose a nation to ally with, which allows you to select cards from another deck to use in your own. You are limited in the amount of cards that you are allowed to use from any allied nation, but by having this system, new strategies are able to be tested and utilized based on cards from multiple different decks that can synergize pretty well. When the game starts, each player has a chance to do a mulligan, which basically means that you can redraw your hand if you're unhappy with your initial draw. Each turn, players draw a card and gain a credit. Credits basically serve as this game's version of mana. Every card has an associated credit cost in order to be played. You start with low-cost cards at the beginning of the game and slowly build your way up into higher-cost cards in the later turns of the game. As is expected with card games, there are a number of different types of cards with their own different card effects. In order to simplify things, the main different card types are infantry, tanks, planes, and orders. Each of these groups have multiple different types of units based on real-world vehicles or infantry divisions. There are also artillery cards as well as fighter and bomber variants of planes. Orders are sort of like spell cards. They are a one-time use card that allows a certain effect or action to take place. These effects vary wildly between decks. One card may eliminate a random card on the opponent's side of the field, one may gift one of your units with a buff, or one could make an enemy card retreat back to its owner's hand. Individual units can have a number of secondary effects or abilities. Guard is an ability where one card can protect adjacent units from damage. Smokescreen makes it so that enemies are unable to attack a specific unit until that unit either moves or attacks first. Destruction initiates an effect after a card has been destroyed, and heavy armor allows for units to take reduced damage. There are a number of other card effects in addition to these that serve to make the game much more complex and engaging. One of the other unique gameplay features in Cards is the addition of a front line. Depicted as a line on the battlefield, in order to attack the enemy's HQ, units need to move forward and push the front line. Airplane units and artillery are able to attack from any range on the battlefield, but infantry and tanks need to move in close in order to get any damage off. Many card effects will offer buffs or negative effects to cards that are positioned in the front line. The addition of the front line gives the flow of battle a different feeling than is present in other card games. The feeling of having the enemy forces close in on you fills the player with worry and tension that is energized or excited should the player be able to turn the tables and push the front line the other way. It's the one specific gameplay feature that differentiates the game from other card battle games, and one feature they can call uniquely their own. Getting off the topic of game mechanics, cards also have various sound effects and visual effects that play and give a greater sense of war throughout the match. Planes strafe over the field, leaving a trail of bullets, tank shells erupt in a satisfying boom, and crisp reloading sounds are a great accent to a card getting a health or damage buff. It's also really cool watching the shadows of bombers fly over the game table when a bombing run occurs. Cards offers 3 main game modes currently: Training, Battle, and Draft. Battle mode is your standard online battle mode. If you are not used to the mechanics of card games or are not the most strategic thinker, you will have a hard time in battle mode. I won a couple matches in my 10 hours of playtime, but more times than not, I would leave a game with my ass thoroughly kicked. If you're like me, then your next mode will likely be Training mode. Here you can fight against AI opponents and test new deck combinations you may want to bring online. The AI here is definitely not as smart as other human players, but it isn't altogether dumb. I had lost 2 to 3 matches against the AI due to poor strategy or not paying attention. But it is a good mode to play if you want to enjoy the game more casually and not get annihilated online. Draft mode is also a mode that's present in other card games. Basically, for a small fee paid with in-game or real-world currency, you can draft a deck of randomly generated cards and then take that deck online and compete with it to try and get greater rewards than you would normally. The more wins you get with your deck, the more rewards you will receive. However, should you lose 3 games, you are then removed from the draft and you have to accept the rewards that you have earned to that point. Draft mode is a fun change of pace to the normal game modes. While the cards you get to choose may be randomized, the game pulls selections from all the cards that are available in the game, regardless of whether or not you own the card yourself. It's a fun way to experiment with cards you may never unlock or play with outside of the draft format. Seeing as the game is free to play, there is an online store where you can buy booster packs to unlock more cards to use in your decks. There is also an in-game currency that you can gain by completing daily challenges or leveling up different decks after winning matches. It's a card game, so this sort of monetization is to be expected. The prices don't seem super outrageous or anything. Perhaps if I continue playing this game down the line, I would consider throwing some money in for packs. But I was able to afford some packs with the in-game currency relatively easily, so as long as you're willing to put in some work, you will be rewarded. Now, I do have some things I would like to see added or changed down the line for this game. According to the game's roadmap, there are planned expansions, a mobile port, and a campaign mode planned. That's all good stuff, so I won't really cover that here. The main things I would like added are more background music tracks, different playing fields, and the ability to customize these things. Each nation has one song that plays on a radio in the background while you play, and it gets repetitive real fast. Licensing notwithstanding, it shouldn't be terribly too hard to implement more music into the game, to at least get a small loop going so that you're not listening to the same song for every 10-minute match. And as far as the different playing fields, I think this would be my most requested feature. The wood table fits the theme of the game well enough, but it gets boring to look at after like 3 games. The objects on the table are always the same, there is no real interactivity with them that you may find with like the fields in Hearthstone, and as I said, the brown table is just plain boring to look at. There are a number of different backgrounds that they could easily implement that still stay true to the theme of the game. A couple of examples I would offer are like a grassy field, or the top of a war chest of some kind, a metal table on, say, a battleship, or heck, just a different table. It would go a long way having a little bit more visual variety in the backgrounds to make the experience get a little less stale match after match. And briefly, I want to mention the card balance. This is obviously a constantly changing aspect of card games and something the devs are working on, but there are certain strategies that can seem a little overpowered at times. Soviet guards that get crazy high defense and British planes that constantly buff and can attack anything are some strategies that just weren't too fun to come up against and seemed surprisingly popular online. It's a delicate balance to get it just right, but seeing as you only find out what deck your opponent has when you start playing, you can't really plan ahead to combat certain strategies. You are either going to be positioned well at the beginning of a match or at a massive disadvantage. So those are my impressions of Cards. If you're interested in card battle games and want to experience a fresh take, or you're a fan of World War II games, I think there's a lot to like about this game. The game should be leaving early access within the next few months, so I'd say give it a download and try it out. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.